man, it's an awesome time to be an NBA fan, especially during the NBA trade deadline, which happened to be today. And there were a whole bunch of big moves. Teams got a lot better, teams got a lot worse, and let's get right into that. Today's video will be more brief and not as more in depth. Next week we'll do a podcast going into more depth about all the trades, our winners and losers, but I'm just gonna go over the big ones too. I'm not gonna go over a whole bunch of the little ones because I believe there were like 17 trades or 17 transactions that happened today. So the first big trade I'd like to talk about was Nikola Vucevic going to the Chicago Bulls for Wendell Carter Jr. and Otto Porter Jr. So I actually don't hate this for either team. Obviously, I love it more for the Bulls, who are getting an all-star center who's really gifted offensively. Struggles a bit defensively, but he's not the worst defensively. So I think they'll definitely live with that. And him and Levine and pick and roll, just him and Levine in general, I think will fit great. I'm not sure what this means for Lauri Markkanen. While he is more of a stretch four, he likes to play on the perimeter, he still is a tall guy that you would like to see develop into a guy that has a post-up game. So I don't know if that will take away from him or make him better. I still haven't, it's early on. They haven't even played together yet, so I guess we'll see what happens there. And I think him and Zach LaVine will fit great. Same with Kobe White and Patrick Williams, same thing. And then on the Magic side, I think Otto Porter Jr. expiring contract, so that'll be coming off their books, so that'll be great for them in the offseason. And then Wendell Carter Jr., he's a good young center. He has a lot of promise. A lot of people, including me, think he could be like an Al Horford type, so I hope he develops into that. They have a weird collection of centers now and young talent, but I think at the worst, at least if you're the Magic and a Magic fan, you have a bunch of young talent, which you really didn't before. And me and Eddie were talking about this yesterday. Well, I do think the Magic can be a good team and keep it together and be like the 7 and 8 seed, but what's the point? What's the point of being the 7 and the 8 seed for the next 3 years? Why not just try and get the best young players you can now? And then another good and funny point I heard was I was listening to the Chris Vernon show, so shout out to him, and how we all kind of thought Vucevic was untradeable or untouchable as of this trade deadline. I know I did in our in our preview podcast yesterday. I talked about how I didn't think Vucevic would get traded, but we really just kind of got fooled because the Celtics didn't have enough. That doesn't mean other teams couldn't entice the Magic into trading or being able to let go of him. And obviously the Bulls were willing to do that and showed that they were, obviously, because they gave up a young player in Wendell Carter. And I like this move for the Bulls just moving forward because you're going to have Vucevic, I believe, for at least 3 more years, and he's going to be amazing offensively for you. And I think if I'm a Bulls fan, I got to be thrilled because they're making moves, and hopefully fans can get back in the building, and that'll be fun to see him and Zach LaVine in person, hopefully. And it's always good to have 2 All-Stars. You can always sell that to the fans. I think they're a lock for the playoffs now. I don't think that they'll win the finals because of this move, but I don't think they even win a playoff series, but they can at least be competitive and be a lock for the playoffs, where beforehand I feel like they were going to be in the play-in game. So I like this trade. I think at the end of the day, I think I would have the Bulls winning this trade as of right now, but we'll see what Wendell Carter turns in. So the second trade I'd like to talk about, it's more the team than anything, but the Magic ended up trading Evan Fournier for 2 second-round picks to the Celtics. While the Celtics didn't make the splash that we thought and hoped that they would make, and they didn't use their trade exception, but I think Evan Fournier can be a good player for them. He could be that missing piece. He could fit in with that missing piece of Gordon Hayward leaving. He could fit in that role really well, and I hope that he can keep up his offensive efficiency with the Celtics. He's not the greatest defensively, which hurts the Celtics because they're not good defensively this year, but at the end of the day, having scoring helps, and bringing in a player like Evan Fournier, who's, a proven veteran. He's proven that, he can score in the biggest moments, kind of. He's played a good amount of playoff series, so you at least feel confident about that. I think if I'm a Celtics fan, I leave the trade deadline a bit pissed off, but at least you can look at Evan Fournier and be like, okay, well, we have him for a year, and I guess we'll see what we have, and maybe you're able to retain him, maybe you're not. But I guess I kind of like it for both teams. The Magic, getting 2 second-round picks, and if you're the Celtics, you didn't really give anything up for a good scorer that can come off your bench or maybe eventually even be a starter. And he's not the worst playmaker. He can keep the ball moving, and like I was saying, I think they're missing that Gordon Hayward type player, where I don't think they're exactly the same, but he'll probably fit in at that role and be their small forward off the bench, or starting small forward, because they're really in love with playing Jason Tatum at the power forward. So I think I would just have this as a draw as of right now, but we'll see what happens with the picks and Evan Fournier. And then one of the last trades, probably one of the bigger trades that happened today was Aaron Gordon going to the Nuggets and Gary Clark going with him for Gary Harris, RJ Hampton, a 2025 protected first-round pick. So I love this for the Nuggets. I think Aaron Gordon can be a bit overrated at times just because, his dunk contest stuff and all the crazy athleticism stuff. But he's just going to fit in perfectly here, and I think he'll be a better Jeremy Grant, even though we're seeing what Jeremy Grant can do in a, being the go-to scorer. But I think he's going to be better defensively for them. I think he's going to be better offensively too, like not necessarily shooting wise, but what he's going to be able to do cutting and screening. Like he's going to be perfect in the pick and roll, and you could, but Jeremy Grant's not the best pick and roll player, and I think Aaron Gordon can be just because of how athletic he is and the fact that he can shoot it as well. I just think, and defensively, he's going to bring it every night. I think this is a trade for the for the Nuggets that upgrades them massively defensively, which they've been struggling at this year. And in my opinion, I like playing Michael Porter Jr. at the small forward, so I think it just works out perfectly, even though, Michael Porter Jr. is 6'10", he's more of a shooter than anything, so you can move him back outside. I think he's more comfortable as a small forward, in my opinion, as of right now, so I just love it for the Nuggets. So then let's go to the flip side with the Magic. Hopefully Gary Harris, I still have hope in him. I think, he's still a pretty good young player, but, obviously he has a lot of money. He's being paid a lot of money right now, so hopefully he can return to what he was offensively. If not, defensively he's great, which isn't going to bring a whole lot to the Magic because they're probably not going to be a playoff team, but if he can get back to where he was offensively, they could contend for that play-in seed. Not this year, but in the coming years. And then RJ Hampton, I really like him. I think he's a great young prospect, so it's worth a shot for the Magic. And basically they got 2 first-round picks if you think about it, because RJ Hampton hasn't played a whole lot this year, and the 2025 protected first-round picks, so we'll see what that turns out to be. Obviously right now the Nuggets have won this trade, but we'll see how Gary Harris and RJ Hampton do with the Magic. And I look forward to seeing RJ Hampton be able to play more. And the Gary Harris thing is weird because you would think he would play so well off of great offensive players like Jamal Murray and, Nikola Jokic, but maybe it's just one of those guys where he just didn't fit in. Maybe he needs to be more of the focal point of the offense than just being used as a defensive specialist. So we'll see there. So this was a weird one for me because I'm a big Trailblazers fan, and I love Gary Trent Jr. I've loved him. I think most people just remember him from the bubble, but he really came onto the scene right before the bubble, and I was like, okay, we got something here. This guy's going to be good. And yeah, I'm going to miss him. And Rodney Hood, he had some great games as a Blazer, but it just didn't work out this year, so I'm not sad to see him go, but he seemed like everyone in the locker room really liked him, so he will be missed by the locker room, but not necessarily the fans. Sorry, Rodney Hood. I don't mean to hurt your feelings there, but at the moment, Norman Powell is the better player than Gary Trent Jr. at everything, in my opinion. But if we can't retain Norman Powell, I'm gonna be a bit pissed because Gary Trent Jr. is the younger player and definitely has the higher ceiling because he's 22 and Norman Powell is 27, and Norman Powell and him are almost putting up the same offensive numbers, but the only difference is, in my opinion, Norman Powell has the ability to go for 40, while I don't feel like Gary Trent Jr. is quite there. And defensively, every night, Norman Powell brings it. While there's going to be better flashes from Gary Trent Jr., it's just not... Sorry, excuse me again, but Gary Trent Jr., he's not going to be there consistently, night in and night out defensively, but night in and night out, he's going to shoot the lights out of the ball. So I think it's one of those trades where, Raptors fans are excited to get Gary Trent Jr. and the Blazers fans are excited to get Norman Powell, and they're both appreciative of what they did, and we're like, you guys got a guy here, and they're like, you guys got a guy here. So I think, and on the flip side with the Raptors, he's going to fit in perfectly. Once Lowry leaves and whatnot, him and Van Fleet will fit perfectly. He's a bigger guard that can shoot. He's not ISO heavy, like I was saying. He's more of a shooter more than anything, but he can take you off the dribble, and defensively, he's long and athletic, and in that scheme and around those players, he's only going to be better defensively because, the Blazers' defense isn't their biggest thing. It's not their calling card. It's not their biggest focus. So, in the Raptors, that's one of their things. So, I think him being in a more defensive-oriented place will definitely make him only better defensively. And I think it's a fair trade. It's a trade that I think will work out both for great teams. And there is a wrinkle here that is people aren't talking about and or thinking about. So because of this trade, shout out to Bobby Marks who tweeted this. He's an awesome follow on Instagram and Twitter if you're not already following him. But Toronto and Portland can exceed the cap via the bird rights to sign Trent Jr. and Powell. So this offseason, the Blazers would have probably lost Gary Trent Jr. without trading him. So I think, while we would love to keep him, I think Norman Powell's a great player and a great player to go get. So I'm happy about that. And yeah, we'll have small guards, but Norman Powell has a 6'11 wingspan, so that gives him the ability, and he has the strength to guard a lot of small forwards. So I think that it'll be an upgrade as of right now for the Blazers. We'll see what happens with Gary Trent Jr.'s career, and I wish him nothing but the best of luck, and same with Rodney Hood. So at least with this, like I was saying, with the bird rights and all that, the Blazers should be able to, and hopefully will, sign Norman Powell to a team-friendly contract, or just a contract in general. It might be a bit of an overpay for him, but yeah, they'll be able to keep him at least while they would have probably lost Gary Trent Jr., and I think that's something that a lot of Blazers fans are not thinking about. And I only have 2 more trades that I would like to discuss, and these will be briefly. But finally, Victor Odipo is heading to the Miami Heat after the bubble, saying, hey, I would like to join you guys, get me to Miami, he said basically. And the trade consists of Victor Odipo to the Heat for Avery Bradley, Kelly Olynyk, and a draft swap. So as you can see, the Heat just ransacked, murdered the Rockets in this trade, basically took advantage of them. And let me talk about how the Rockets have really screwed themselves. So they could have had 10 years at least of Ben Simmons, but they were like, their owner was like, well, I don't get along with Daryl Morey, I'm pissed at him. Just because you're mad at someone and you didn't like how things went, you're not going to trade for the better player. That's pretty dumb in my opinion. You should always take the best player. And then on the flip side, I think Ben Simmons is better than these players, I'd rather have Karis LeVert and Jared Allen for 4 years than half a year of Victor Oladipo, especially when after the James Harden trade, we all knew they weren't going to be a playoff team. They weren't going to be that great. They already weren't that great with James Harden this year. And it just makes no sense, because if you think about it from the Heat standpoint, they don't have to go get Victor Oladipo this trade deadline. They can wait till the offseason, because they're probably going to get him in free agency. So it's kind of like, well, we're not going to give you our best players. We're not going to give you a whole lot because we can get them in 3 months. So we'll give you all of our bad contracts, basically, and players that we don't want anymore, and that's what they did. And I think a lot of Heat fans are happy to have Victor Odipo over Avery Bradley. I think Heat fans are done with Kelly Olynyk, everything you see on Twitter and Instagram, so I think they're happy to see him go and to bring in Victor Odipo. And then on the flip side, they brought in Bielitsa, and I think they will bring in LaMarcus Aldridge, so those can be 2 players that they could play at the power forward after losing Kelly Olynyk and Jay Crowder. So this trade is easily won by the Heat. It's the only one where it's easily won. You don't have to see how things get played out. I just think automatically the Heat won this trade. So, and then the last trade I want to talk about was JJ Redick being traded to the Mavericks for James Johnson and Wes. I'm sorry, I don't know his last name. I can't pronounce it. You'll learn throughout our YouTube videos and podcasts. I'm terrible at pronunciation, something I'm working at. But in a second-round pick to the New Orleans Pelicans for JJ Redick and Nikola Melli. So I actually think this is a great trade for the Mavericks, and it's not the worst for the Pelicans, because you're going to lose JJ Redick here in a couple years, and Nikola Melli isn't obviously in their future. And for the Mavericks, you're just adding shooting. You're adding JJ Redick, who's hopefully can go back to shooting his normal percentages, and he'll fit in perfectly at that Seth Curry role. And the Mavericks are going all in on offense right now, not a whole lot of defense for them, but that's okay. When you have a player like Luka, you have to go try and make your team as good as possible, and surrounding shooters around him is something that is outstanding. And then on the Pelicans side, Wes Ndu is a young defensive-oriented player where hopefully maybe he can fit in there and find a role and really help them defensively. And James Johnson is just an expiring contract coming off their books, so they're going to love that in free agency and moving forward. And maybe he brings some defensive toughness to their team this year, but I would be surprised if he plays a whole lot. And that's all I got for the NBA trade deadline.